Hey guys, I'm Nina Tran and welcome to my class. I'm so excited to have you here. Let's get started. Before we begin writing, it's important to assume a proper and comfortable writing position. So for me, I like to sit here at the edge of my chair like this, with both of my feet planted on the floor just underneath my knees. I like to sit at the edge of my chair like this, just a few inches from my table. I don't want to be so close to my table that I'm leaning against it where I'm being supported by my table, nor do I want to be so far from my table that I have to lean forward like this, where my arms are supporting the weight of my upper body. So I don't want to do that because they're already doing a lot of work with writing and moving the paper. There's no need to give them any extra work. So I like to sit right here just at the edge, and I like to pivot from my hip so I can lean forward if I want to, or lean back from my hip. What I want to avoid is slouching, but I don't necessarily write straight up like this either. Okay, where I'm intentionally curving my spine upward. This is not very comfortable. It's not a very comfortable position. So I'm sitting upright, but I'm not stiff and straight up like this, nor am I slouched like this. So I'm just in this comfortable upright position, bending forward from my head. Okay, so the next thing to do is to figure out our arm position on the table. The best thing to do is to make a little triangle like this with your hands, okay, so that you have kind of like a 90-degree angle up here. And you're going to close your eyes. You're just going to gently place this on the table as if you're going to write with your eyes closed. Just place it on the table, just like this. So you want your forearm to be resting on the table, and you want your elbow to be protruding off the table just a couple of inches or so. And having your elbow off the table allows for this free movement. It allows you to push your arm forward and pull it back. It allows you to roll side to side comfortably and freely. Now, if you had your whole forearm on the table, including your elbow, I don't know about you, but my elbow kind of gets in the way of this movement and it's not very comfortable. So I want my elbow to be off the table just a little bit so that my arm is still directly right in front of me, okay? As you're writing though, you never want to have your whole arm off the table where you're just resting your writing hand on the table like this from your wrist. So what this does is if you don't have the support of your arm here on the table, the tendency may be to slouch a little bit, and it's just not a good position for writing. So when you're writing, you want your forearm to be on the table like this, with your elbow slightly off the table. So I'm right-handed, so this is my writing hand. I'm going to place my writing hand, the pen on my writing hand like this. And with my non-writing hand, or my left hand, my non-writing hand is responsible for moving the paper. So my right hand is already doing quite a bit of work writing, right? Focusing on the writing. My left hand is going to be moving the paper as I'm writing. So as you're writing, you'll begin here at the top left corner of your page, right? You're going to start here. And what you don't want to do as you're writing is you don't want to move this position that you've already established for your arm, your elbow, and your hand. So as you're writing, you don't want to be moving your arm and hand this way. Because by the time you get to the end of the page, well, what happens? By the time you get to the end of the page, assuming that you did not move your paper at all, your hand will be here in this position. It's no longer here where you started in this perfect, ideal writing position. Now you're here. And when you're here, you no longer have that proper support on your forearm and your elbow is way off the table. So chances are, when you get to this point, you probably needed to turn your body a little bit so that you can look this way. And without the support, maybe by this time, you'll have crouched over your work this way. Okay. So instead of moving your arm as you're writing, what you want to do is you want to keep your arm in this position, and you want your non-writing hand to move the paper as you're writing. So as you're writing, every couple of inches or so, you'll use your non-writing hand to move your paper. So at the beginning of your writing session, you may be here. In the middle of your writing session, your paper will be in this position. And by the time you get to the end, your paper will be in this position. But notice that your hand and your arm and your elbow are still in this writing position. So it's kind of like a typewriter, right? When you have a typewriter and it's typing, all the letters are coming in from that middle point, and it's your paper that is moving back and forth and up and down, right? So you want to treat this position kind of like a typewriter. And this space here, where we're keeping our hand, is called our writing zone. We want to stay within our writing zone as we're writing. Now, this is a term that I learned from Michael Salt, this writing zone position. So remember that as you're writing, keep your posture. Avoid slouching too much. Try not to place your weight on the table. Try not to be too far back where you're leaning forward and putting all your weight on your arms. And you want to stay in your writing zone as you're writing. You want to move your paper, not your arm.
To start, you'll find that you really don't need a whole lot to get started. Here I have a leather blotter that I purchased from David Grimes several years ago, and it's just a thin piece of leather that acts as a cushion for when I'm writing. You do not need a leather blotter, so if you don't have one, don't worry about it. You can simply just take your writing sheet and stack maybe 3 or 4 sheets underneath your paper, and that will act as a blotter. So don't worry if you don't have any fancy blotters. You will also need a ruler. Okay, so I like this 12-inch or 30-centimeter ruler here. I like the clear ones because it allows me to see my paper underneath whenever I'm making measurements or drawing lines. Next, you will need a pencil. Any good old pencil will do. I prefer to work with something that has a soft lead versus one that has a hard lead. If you prefer to work with a mechanical pencil, that's great. That's perfectly fine. And whenever I work with a pencil, I always like to have an eraser handy. Next, we will need a pen holder. So there are 2 kinds of pen holders. We have the straight pen holder and we have the oblique pen holder. You can use whichever one is comfortable for you. So I prefer to use an oblique pen holder. There are advantages to using an oblique pen holder, but we'll get to that later. So just use whichever tool is most comfortable for you. If you're not sure, go ahead and bring them both to class and we'll figure that out together. Okay, now we can't have just a pen holder. We also need a pen or a pointed pen or a nib. So there are many different names for these little things. You want to get the pointed, flexible nibs so that when you apply pressure, like what I'm doing here, the two prongs open up, as you can see, and when there's no pressure, they close into one point. When you apply pressure, they open up like that. So you want a pointed, flexible nib, not a broad nib. And really, any one will do. If you're not sure which one, try the Nikko G's or the Tachikawa G's. Those are good ones to start. If you are a little bit more comfortable with flexible nibs, I prefer the Hunt 101. But when it comes to nibs and pen holders, all of it really depends on your personal preference. So there's no one nib fits all. It really depends on you. But my preference is the more flexible ones like the Hunt 101, personally. Next, you'll need ink. So any dark colored ink will do. I like to work with the Kuretake Sumi ink only because I've just been using it for a long time and I'm really happy with the results that I get from this ink. You can also try walnut ink, which is more of like a brown, dark brown color, whereas this one is black. So any dark colored ink will do. It doesn't really matter as long as it goes well on your paper. Now, I don't like to dip my ink in the bottle. So instead what I use is some kind of an inkwell. This one here is a dinky dip, and it's essentially just a block of wood with holes in it that holds these little jars where I could put just a small amount of ink, and it's great for traveling, and I highly recommend getting some kind of an inkwell like this. Next, you will need some kind of container for water, just a small container. I got this one here from my friend in Singapore. It's so cute with the little fish in there. I love to use this one. You'll also need some kind of paper towel or cloth for cleaning your nib. Okay? And finally, you'll need a few different colored markers. I like this brand here, but any fine point marker will do. So just any fine point like that. It could be microns, it could be a ballpoint. It's great for taking notes. So choose any 3 different colors, and I usually have about 5 with me. So that's it. That's all you need to get started. Nibs come in different sizes, shapes, and colors. The important thing is to try a few different ones and see which one works best for you. So they vary not only in the way that they look, but in their flexibility as well. So some nibs will be more flexible than other nibs. Some will have sharper points than other nibs. It's really going to be up to you which kind of nib or nibs you select for your writing. Now, over time, your nibs will wear and tear, right, with use, depending on how corrosive your ink is. So they may start out as something shiny and bright like this, and then over time your ink may stain your nib, so like that. Sometimes too you'll see that your tines will start to become thinner. Okay, so the thing about pointed pen is that, well, they don't last forever. So after, well, depending on how often you're using it, depending on what ink you're using it, depending on the type of paper that you're using, well, that will determine the lifespan of your nib. So if you're using more corrosive inks like iron gall, then it's going to eat up your nib quickly. Or if you're using rough paper, it's going to wear out your point more quickly. If you're practicing for hours a day, then it's going to wear your nib more quickly. I personally go through one nib a week, maybe something like that, maybe 2 weeks if I'm not really writing so much. But it all depends. It depends on how much pressure you're applying. There are lots of factors for how long your nib will last. Now, you'll know that your nib is time. It's time to change your nib when you are just running it gently up the paper and it's scratchy, or whenever you're writing and your nib is catching the fiber on your paper and it's creating ink splatters. That might be a good time to change your nib, or if your nib becomes damaged. So if you've applied too much pressure and your nib is permanently in this state where the tines are open, it's time to change your nib. Or if one of your tines, one of the little teeth, has broken off, it's time to change your nib. Before you start using a new nib, it's important to prep your nib. Prepping a nib simply means that you are cleaning off any oil or dirt that may be on your nib from manufacturing, or maybe you've just been touching it too much with your fingers and the natural oil from your hands is now on the nib. So if you do not prep your nib and you have all of this oil on there, what happens is when you dip your pen in ink, you'll notice that the ink is not coating the nib evenly. And if your ink is not coating your nib evenly, you may have trouble with ink flow. Okay, so to prep your nib, the simplest way to do it is, well, first let me clean this off. So just wiping this ink off. Okay, so the simplest thing to do is to take a clean paper towel and moisten a little clean corner with your saliva. Okay, so I don't know if you can see it, but my paper towel is now a little bit moistened. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold the nib from the base, from the round part, not the pointy part. And I'm just simply going to wipe my nib, the top part. I'm going to just gently wipe it off. So now I've still got some ink in there from when I dipped it, but if you haven't dipped yours yet, it should be clean. Then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to clean the underside. And this is assuming that when you applied saliva onto your paper towel, you didn't eat any greasy food or anything. So let's just make that assumption. Okay, so once you're satisfied with your cleaning, okay, what you can then do is hold the pen between your paper towel like this so that you're exposing the base, and you're going to take your pen holder and you're going to insert the nib into your flange like so. Notice that I never touched this point with my fingers once I've cleaned it. Okay, and if you want to, you can give it another quick clean. Again, I've just moistened a little piece of my towel here, and I'm just going to give it a quick wipe back and forth, including on the underside. And then you can dip your pen. Now, when you dip your pen in the ink, you want to dip it just from the tip past this reservoir hole. Do you see this hole in the middle of your pen? That's called the reservoir. So you just want to dip your pen from here down to about there. You don't need to dip your whole flange in there. In fact, I would advise you not to do so. Okay, so let's go ahead and dip our pen just past that reservoir. And you'll notice that my ink is now coating the nib evenly. Now, if I dipped it properly, you can really see it. So it's coating the nib evenly. Okay, so let's see if we can demonstrate that with another nib that has not been prepped. So to compare, we have a non-prepped nib here. Notice that the ink is sort of, it's not coating the pen evenly, versus a well-prepped nib. Notice that the ink is coating the nib evenly here. And this is what you want. So here's a nib that has not been prepped on my left, and the nib that's been prepped in my pen holder. Just as it's important to prep a nib before using it, it's important to clean your nib between writing or after you're writing. So you never want to let ink dry on your nib like this. So the first thing to do is, while it's still on your pen, you want to wipe off as much of the ink as you can. You just want to blot it on your paper towel and just give it a nice wipe. So if I still want to write, I'll go ahead and just wipe it like this, maybe give it a quick dip into my water, and then I'll just continue wiping until I'm quite satisfied. I don't need to clean it off completely, but I'll just get all the dried ink off, and then I'm ready to write again. Now, if you're not going to continue working and you're done for the day, so once you've given it this preliminary wipe, I would remove the pen from the flange, and I would hold the pen here on the base as if I were to prep it. Then I would just continue with the cleaning. I would just continue wiping it on my paper towel until I was certain that there was no more ink on the nib. So see here, I'm still getting a little bit of ink. So I want to make sure that before I store my nib, that it's perfectly clean. That way, the next time I use it, it's ready to go and I don't need to clean it. Or let's say I was working with black ink this time, but the next time I want to work with white ink. Now, if I have any residual black ink on my nib, it's going to contaminate my white ink. So it's really important to clean off all the ink off of your nib after each use. When it comes to pen holders, there's no one size fits all. All these pen holders are designed differently. They're made of different things. They weigh different weights. They're shaped differently. They're different colors. The width of the body is different. They're different lengths. I mean, there are so many things to consider when choosing a pen holder, not just based on how it looks, but how it feels on your hand when you're writing. That's really the most important thing. The most important thing to consider when choosing a pen holder is how it feels in your hand when you're writing. Is it a comfortable pen? Is it too thick? Is it too thin? You may need to try a couple of different pen holders until you get to the one that fits nicely. So if you get a chance to try out a few different pen holders from different makers, maybe you have a friend who owns a pen holder that you want to try, I highly encourage you to do that. So I'm going to demonstrate how I hold the pen using this pen holder by Chris Yoke. I love this pen because it fits nicely in my hand, first of all. And second of all, I really like the weight of the pen. It's not too heavy. I really like pens that are quite light. The flange is adjusted to a nice angle. It just feels really good in my hands. So this is one of my favorite pen holders. Now, there are many different ways to hold a pen. I know some people who hold their pen a little bit higher up the pen, here, like around this part, and they will write this way. And this is perfectly fine as long as you can write that way and you can execute the letters without any problems. I know some people who hold their pen with 4 fingers, like this. Okay, so they'll hold their pen this way, and this is perfectly comfortable for them. I know some people who hold their pen with sort of their fingers overlapping each other like this. So there are many different ways to hold a pen, and the most important thing is that you're able to write the letters without any problem, and you're able to achieve the strokes that you want. So it doesn't really matter how you hold your pen as long as you're able to do what you need to do. But what I'm going to show you is how I hold my pen, which is sort of the conventional way to hold a pen. And so to begin, I place my pen holder with the flange up between my middle finger and my index finger like this, resting between my index and my thumb. Okay, then I'll move my thumb down towards the flange like this to secure it. So I'm holding my pen with 3 fingers, my middle finger, my index finger, and my thumb. And notice that my thumb is just above the flange like this. Okay, and my index finger is just right here along this curve. So I typically hold it like this, where this bottom curve of the pen is also resting here on my middle finger. So this is a very comfortable grip for me. Sometimes I'll hold it a little bit lower, so I'll sometimes put my finger down a little bit closer to the face, or sometimes called the foot. Different penmen call these different parts different things. But sometimes I'll just hold it a little bit closer to the edge of the pen like this, and that's also very comfortable. Sometimes my pen holder will be resting here. Sometimes it will be resting above my knuckle like this. So it depends on what I'm doing. It depends on what script I'm writing. It could just depend on the day. Who knows, right? But sometimes I like to hold my pen more upright. Sometimes I like to hold it a little bit lower. So let me turn my camera this way so that you can see. Okay. Okay. All right, so sometimes I like to hold my pen holder. Oops, let me just a little bit more. So sometimes I like to hold my pen holder like this. Again, with this more upright. And sometimes I like to hold it a little bit lower. So let me insert a nib in here so that we can see the difference that makes. So I've got a pen holder in here. I've got a nib in there. So if I hold my pen more upright, then my nib will be also more upright. So typically when I write Copperplate, I don't know why I do this, but I tend to do it. I tend to hold my pen a little bit more upright. And when I'm writing Spencerian, I tend to drop my pen down a little bit and I write a little bit more like this. Now you can write Copperplate like this. You can write Spencerian like this. Really how you hold your pen is up to you. It's what's comfortable for you. The most important thing is that you're able to execute the strokes that you want. And there's really no one way to hold the pen, and your angle is going to vary depending on what your preference is. So it's important to sort of just play around with your pen holder and just write a little bit. And as you write, you're going to figure out what your preference is. And don't be afraid to try different things. So if you're currently holding your pen like this, or maybe like this, you know, there's so many different ways to hold a pen. If you're holding it this way, just know that sometimes certain grips will have a limitation. For instance, if you're holding your pen like this, you may not be able to make these really long strokes because your finger movement is limited, right? So if you're holding your pen this way, just know that you may be limiting your movement, but if you're able to execute those letters just fine, there's nothing wrong with that. And just know that there are advantages to certain pen grips. So if you're holding it this way, notice that you are able to make really long strokes, right? So there are limitations to holding pens a certain way. And as long as you're mindful of that, that's really all that you need to know. So don't be afraid to try different pen grips, especially if you're not sure about the way that you're holding a pen. Okay, so just try different things and see what works for you. Okay, so but this is the conventional way to hold a pen, and notice that my hand is resting here on the side, just like this. Before we begin writing, it's important to understand the different types of movement that we are going to use when we write. We have finger movement, wrist movement, forearm movement, and a combination of all three called combined movement. Now, there's also whole arm movement, but we won't be going over that today. So the first kind of movement is finger movement. Finger movement is this natural push and pull motion that our finger wants to do. Now, our finger also wants to move, or it can move also side to side, but it's not as natural as this pushing and pulling motion, right? So if I told you to move your fingers up and down, it would naturally do this kind of a motion. So our fingers, let me turn my camera. And oh, by the way, I am sitting here, and notice that my paper is at this angle. Okay. So I'm just going to turn my camera a little bit like this. And so we have finger movement. And finger movement wants to push up and pull down. So our finger naturally wants to do this kind of an up and down push pull motion. So if you closed your eyes and you just placed your pen on the paper and you just made quick up and down movements, it would look something like this. Okay, so our finger naturally wants to push up, pull down, push up, pull down, push up, pull down. So that is finger movement. And with finger movement, you can make really precise strokes. Okay. Now again, also our finger also wants to move this way, right? It also wants to move side to side, but it's not quite as natural. So right now we're just looking at the most natural movement that these elements want to make: the finger, the wrist, and the forearm. So next we have wrist. So our wrist is pivoting from this point. So our wrist can't really move up and down. I mean, yeah, we can't. So it wants to just do this swiping motion, left to right motion, right? So our wrist naturally wants to move side to side. Okay, so if we moved our wrist rapidly, we would get this kind of a stroke, right? So our wrist wants to move sideways, side to side. Next, we have forearm movement. So forearm movement, as we talked about before, is when we are pushing and pulling on our forearm, this part. So our forearm is resting on that. Our forearm is resting on this muscle here. It's on the table. And with that, we can either push up or pull down on this muscle. So it allows us to push up and pull down. It also allows us to roll side to side. Okay, and it also allows us to roll in these circular motions, and it also allows us to sort of pivot from this point, from our elbow, so that we can make this kind of motion. So there's a lot going on with the forearm movement. So, but the first thing is that we're able to do a push and a pull motion. So without moving our fingers and without moving our wrist, we are going to just push and pull with our forearm. Okay, so we're going to be doing this. Let me move my camera a little bit so you can see. We're going to be doing this kind of a motion, this push, pull, push, pull. Notice that my elbow is off the table, my elbow. And I'm going to push, pull, and I'm going to do this rapidly like this. Okay, so for the push-pull, I'm just going, so from my forearm, I can go up and down. Okay, so like this, push-pulls. So without moving my fingers, I can make these up and down kinds of strokes. But I can also move side to side, right? And I can also go around either clockwise or counterclockwise. So I can go counterclockwise, again, without moving my fingers. I can make these oval shapes. Okay, so it's a very useful thing to be able to use our forearm. Now, combined movement is a combination of the three, and it's really good to use all three, because you'll see that here, let's make a figure eight. If I make a figure eight, I'm going to hold my wrist down so I'm not using it. If I make a figure eight using only my fingers, so if I lock my arm down and I lock my wrist down and I make a figure eight, my figure eight, this is the limit of my figure eight. I can't really make it any much bigger than that, but I can make it accurately using my fingers. Now, if I combine my wrist and my fingers, so now I'm going to move both my fingers and my wrists. I'm going to use the side to side, and I'm going to use all this finger movement, but I'm not going to move my forearm. Then I can make a slightly bigger, well, not slightly, it's actually a whole lot bigger figure eight. You see that? Okay, so we need to use at least our finger and our wrist. Now, if I combine all three, finger, wrist, and forearm, well, I can make an even bigger one, right? So this is particularly useful for flourishing or for Spencerian capitals. So the main idea is that you do not want to limit your movement to strictly finger movement. At the very least, if you're doing Copperplate, you can use finger and wrist so that you have a wider range of motion. But ultimately, we want to be able to sort of rely also on our forearm so that we can make bigger strokes. Or say, for instance, we need to draw a downstroke. So if I need to draw a downstroke, but I need to write really big or something like that, and I'm using only my fingers, okay, I can make a pretty long stroke. But if I use my fingers, and if I pull down with my arm, I can make an even longer stroke if I combine movement. Okay, so I don't necessarily need to be using all three at the same time, but it's just fusing the different movements together so that we can make either wider, bigger, rounder strokes, longer strokes, all those things. It's all very important to understand that we are using not just finger movement, but wrist and our forearm, and a combination of two or more of those things. One of the most important things that we need to learn as calligraphers and as penmen is not just to master the letters, but to master our tool. So we need to really hone in on how to use this tool and getting it to do what we want it to do. So first, we are going to turn our paper. We're going to turn it in such a way that when we are in our writing position, we want our nib or our pen to be parallel to the main slant. You see this? You see these slant lines on the paper, on the guide sheet? We have these slant lines, and we want to align our pen to those slant lines because we are going to be making this up and down movement. Now with shaded script, all of our shades, or for the most part, our shades are going to be parallel to the main slant. Okay, so it's 52 degrees for Spencerian, 55 for Copperplate. But the main idea is that when we are pulling down, or when we are pulling down a shade, typically our shade is on this slant. So because the natural movement of our fingers is this, we want to sort of help our fingers out a little bit so that you're not doing so much work. So what we don't want is we don't want our papers to be parallel to us or perpendicular to us, and then we are sort of using our wrist to move sideways, and we're using our fingers to move sideways. And notice too that if we do this, we're going to be dragging our pen across the paper when we apply pressure. So we don't want to do that. Instead, what we want is we want our paper to be, or our slant to be in alignment with our pen. That way when we apply pressure, we are making this natural movement with our finger, and also we are applying even pressure for our pen so that we're not dragging it across the paper. Instead, we're pulling it down on the paper. Okay, so let's do a few exercises. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit, and I'm going to turn my camera so that you're not looking at me at this angle. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to focus, and I'm going to turn my camera. All right, so hopefully you've prepped your nib by now, and let's see, I'm going to do a quick prep to mine. So I'm just giving it a quick wipe. And the first set of exercises that we're going to do are simply just straight lines. So we're going to dip our pen in ink. We're going to make sure that our pen lines up with our straight slant. And what we're going to do is we're going to begin here on this top line. So we have these lines here. We have this bottom line. Let's call this the baseline. Then we have these two dotted lines. Let's call this one the header line. Then we have our first ascender line and our second ascender line. Okay, and the space between our header line and our baseline is called our X height. So we've got these two solid lines and these two dotted lines in between. We're going to start here on the baseline, and we are going to push up without applying any pressure. We're going to push a stroke up parallel to the main slant line. We're going to push a stroke up to the second ascender line. So go as straight as you can. I'm a little bit curved here, but try to go straight Okay, and we're going to just make 5 lines. And try to make those lines equidistant from each other. And you may need to just dip every couple of strokes. Make sure that you're breathing as you do this. Okay, so you've made 5 strokes as best as you can, equidistant from each other. Then we're going to draw a little dot. And we're going to move our paper so that we stay in our writing zone. Next, we are going to pull down a hairline stroke. So for this first set, we went from the baseline up to the second ascender line. Now we're going to come from the second ascender line down to the baseline without applying any pressure. Okay? And make sure that you're breathing. Be mindful of your posture. Just make these as straight as you can, as best as you can. Just like that. Okay? I'm going to draw another one. Now, if you need to keep practicing these, you can go ahead and go all the way along across the whole row, or you could just do the best 5 that you can make, just as what I'm doing here. Okay, next we're going to do the same thing that we did for the second set. We're going to start at the second ascender line and we're going to come all the way down to the baseline. This time we're going to apply a little bit of pressure. And we're going to apply even pressure all the way down. And as best as you can, try to stay on the slant. You may need to rotate your paper a bit more if you find that you're having trouble staying on the slant. Okay, next we are going to apply even more pressure. Not a whole lot more, but just to make this a little bit thicker. And really what we're trying to do is we're trying to practice controlling our pen. Okay, you might need to dip every couple of strokes now. And if you happen to railroad, like what I've just done here, this is called railroading. Don't worry about it. This is perfectly fine. In fact, I'm going to leave it just like that. So remember to move your paper as you go. And don't worry if you have square tops or not. All I care about at this point is applying even pressure from start to finish. Next, we are going to practice applying pressure and releasing pressure. So let's start with no pressure, starting here at the second ascender line. And we're going to start as a hairline and then we're going to gradually apply pressure there. So it's kind of like a wedge shape. Again, try to stay on the slant. Keep them equidistant from each other. And hopefully by now you're sort of getting a feel for when or how frequently you need to dip. And this is just an exercise, so if you railroad, that's okay. All right, so next we're going to start with pressure and then gradually release pressure, and we want to end as a hairline by the time we reach the baseline. So start here at the top with pressure, a little bit of pressure, And then as we come down, we're going to gradually release pressure, and we want to end as a hairline. So go ahead and do that 4 more times. Don't forget to breathe. Go slowly. And as best as you can, stay on the slant. All right. The next set, we are going to apply pressure, release pressure, and then begin applying pressure again. Apply pressure, release pressure, and then begin applying pressure again so that you're a hairline here at the center of the stroke. Apply pressure, release pressure, apply pressure. Pressure, release, pressure. And if you have this little bit of paper fiber, usually what I'll do is I'll just wipe it off on a napkin and see if I could take it off that way. And usually that works. Okay. Next, we are going to begin as a hairline, apply pressure at the center, and then release pressure and end up as a hairline again by the time you reach the baseline. So starting here at the second ascender line, begin as a hairline, gradually apply pressure, and then release pressure. Apply pressure, release pressure. Go nice and slow. Okay. And that concludes our line drills. Next, we're going to do oval drills. But first, let's talk about the oval. So if we drew a little grid here, 3 by 3 grid, let's talk about the ideal oval. Now, the way that I teach Copperplate and Spencerian is I teach that the ideal oval is this size. And this is a concept that I've pulled from Spencerian that I also apply to Copperplate. So we want the width of our oval to be 2 units and the height of our oval to be 3 units, right? So if we did a 3 by 3, we would end up with a circle or a very circle-shaped . Okay, so we don't want this. We want this red dot. So let's aim for that and just do your best. The most important thing is to make them consistently the same size and same shape. So if you make it a little bit rounder, that's okay. If you make it a little bit narrower, that's okay too. So we're going to start here at the second ascender line and we're going to draw an oval without applying any pressure. Just do the best that you can. Oops. Okay. Then we're going to draw another oval. This time we're going to draw our oval. We're going to imagine that there is a line here on the right side of our oval. That is, notice this dotted line is the same slant as this other dotted line. And we're going to begin our next oval here along this dotted line. So right here. So I'm just going to do my best to draw another oval next to it. And then I'm going to continue doing the same thing here. I'm going to draw 5 of them. Make sure that you're breathing. There we go. And as you did these, see if your lenses or these little shapes here are identical in size and shape. And if not, don't worry too much about it, but maybe the next time you do this kind of exercise, that can be a thing that you aim for. Okay, next, we are going to draw indirect ovals. So these ovals were made counterclockwise, and we started at the second ascender line. For this next set, we are going to start on the baseline. Again, no pressure. And we're going to come back down this way. So this time we're going clockwise, beginning from the baseline. And if you have trouble overlapping them, you can pull them apart if you want. The most important thing is that we are doing them carefully and slowly. And try to make them the same size and same shape. They don't have to be perfect, but just do your best. Okay, next, we are going to do the same thing that we did for the first set of ovals. This time we're going to apply pressure, but not right away. Oops, I think I need to change my nib. So we're not going to apply pressure right away. So let's go ahead and imagine that we have this dotted line, right? And we're going to, just like we did on the first set, we're going to begin our next oval along this line here at the top. And what we're going to do is we are going to start our stroke, but we're not going to apply any pressure until we've entered our previous oval. And as we exit this previous oval, we're going to release pressure and become a hairline again. So let's try it. Okay, so most of our shade is contained within that previous oval, and then we're going to try it again. Again, if you have a difficult time keeping the ovals together, you can do them separately. So the main thing is to not apply pressure right away. So these ovals are okay, these shapes are okay, even if you have a little bit more shade there at the top, that's perfectly fine. What I want you to not do is to do this, where you're applying pressure right away and not releasing pressure soon enough, where you have this very thick left side. Instead, what you want is you want to have this hairline up here and this hairline down here. Okay? So when you start your ovals, begin as a hairline, then gradually apply pressure and then release pressure. And notice that for the most part, even though this is a curve, my shade is more or less parallel to the 55-degree slant. So my shade on the oval is not up here, and nor is it down here like this. Okay? My shade is more or less towards the center of the oval. And it is, again, more or less parallel to the slant of my script. All right. So once you've done it that way, we're going to do it the other way, where we are going to begin from the baseline and we're going to apply pressure. Okay, this one can be a little bit more tricky. And again, you can do it together or you could do it separately. And if you have a hard time with making the ovals, you can definitely begin with a pencil. So without any shade, you could just practice making the ovals. Just focus on one direction at first. And once you've gotten comfortable with this direction, you can begin drawing it in the opposite direction. And once you've gotten the hang of the oval and you're ready to do it with a pointed pen, then go for it. So later on, when you're comfortable, you could do running ovals. So you can start with an oval with a little bit of shade. You're going to make this oval a little bit wider than you would have before. And you're going to insert another oval inside there. So a little bit wider. Then once you get here and you need to move your paper, just move your paper. Try to end either at the bottom or at the top, and then you just continue on with your running ovals. Again, this is just practicing pressure and release and control of your pen. And I really need a new nib. That's one sure way to tell if you need a new nib is if your tine is catching and you're getting all these ink splatters. Okay, so just something to try. Now, once you're comfortable with the oval and you want to try something else, you can try different shapes. So another shape to try is this capital stem shape, which is essentially if you had two ovals side by side, like this. This capital stem shape would be right here, sort of hugging the two ovals. So for the capital stem shape, we're going to begin with a curve that straightens out and then curves again. And you want most of your shade to be here at the center. Okay, what you want to avoid is a shade like this that's too heavy from start to finish. Okay, you could just make them individually, or you can start connecting them with another stroke that's going upward and then back down. So these are just pen exercises, and the capital stem ones are a little bit more advanced. The main thing is to focus on getting really nice ovals. Okay, smooth ovals, consistent size and shape, as well as consistent lines, and being really being able to control the amount of pressure that you apply to those strokes. So if you want to try some more advanced ones, you can try the capital stem shapes. Okay. Make sure that you're lifting when you reach the second center line and the baseline. Okay, so on. You could try these kinds of drills too. Again, you're still practicing the capital stem. Do you see the capital stem in here? You come up, make sure that your shade is parallel to the slant. And so on. But again, the main thing is to really get those ovals and those lines down.